Esme.
Oh, the other one.
Yeah, the other one. There is more than one.
Somebody kick the TV, please. Thank you.
There you go.
It happens every time. Almost. It usually happens before we start.
We have to adjust the rabbit ears. You know.
Did you see that though? I didn't even know that was coming, and we still handled it like it was nothing. See, that's a pro right there.
Sometimes you have to get the funds in here, though.
Yeah. Hey.
That's not. That's not. Now, that actually works. That's no joke. That mechanical agitation will fix just about anything.
My grandpa had a TV that you would do that. You just pop it on the side, and it would come back. You have to do it like every 15 minutes.
I can't do that to my I can't do that to my computer anymore now that it's in a glass case. Just like punt. Oh, it's all gone.
That Pam does that to your head though all the time. Serious though. Pam probably does that to your head all the time.
Yeah, domestic violence jokes are funny.
Oh, he went all SJW on me.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I have a hammer for a reason.
Kick his ass tonight, Catholic Fusionist. Kick his ass.
Yeah, you already lost. You already lost, Suris. Just get out.
That's fine.
Yeah, to be fair, this is the one time the Catholic can't be preaching to the choir.
I see what you did there. There.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you.
Welcome everybody.
That was clever.
We're glad that you're here with us today. We're going to have a discussion about Roe v. Wade, pro-life and pro-choice aspects of that. It's topical now, especially with Brett Kavanaugh in the.
You like beer
nomination? Yeah, do you like beer? I knew that was coming. I knew as soon as that came out of my mouth that was going to happen. If you didn't watch last night's Sunday Mass with Mr. Atheist, I bet we watched that clip probably 60 times.
I'd say that's a pretty good estimate.
Yeah, so that is forever burned in my mind. But yeah, we're gonna get to that in just a second. Let me say hello first to Suris and the Catholic Fusionist. Thank you both for coming on. It's good to have you here.
Thank you for having us on.
Thanks.
Sure.
Nice.
And Steve, I heard you're a clown.
I am. I guess I'm a clown because reasons. But I gotta ask Max first. Is that actually your camera? Or is that actually like a filter you have on? Because that's pretty cool.
What filter?
It's okay. It's not a filter.
The question.
It's your camera.
That answers the question right there.
It's like an old retro 50s type thing. It's kind of badass actually.
This is the fault of my computer. It's just terrible.
That's
terrible in a good way.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, I like that. Looks good. Yeah.
So he looks like he could be in a Fallout game right now.
Exactly. That's what bingo. Yes. Back to being a clown. So I guess JMD decided to make a video about us calling us clowns on our inability to do exegesis. And however, when I had asked JMD simple questions about the Bible, he wasn't able to answer them. I'm like, well, how's your exegesis? Because I would ask him basic questions from what would we know to be contradictions, such as scribal errors. He wasn't aware of these things. And it's like, wait a minute, JMD, you're criticizing our exegesis, but you're not even aware of the own contradictions in your own Bible. Help me on this because it's a little confusing. If we're the clowns that can't exegete.
And he used the example from the that talk that we had in that after show of where we were talking about his comment that the Bible wasn't written for lay people. This is why lay people shouldn't read the Bible.
The thing that happened with pragmatic culture.
Yeah,
I mean,
when it happened. Hold on, Max. I'll let you because I do want to hear what you have to say about this. But let me just kind of, for those who don't know, we did an after show and pragmatic culture made the comment. We were talking about the Bible and some examples of some contradictions, and he said, "This is why lay people shouldn't read the Bible." And so my question was, well, who is the book written for? If you're God and you want everybody to come to you and be a part of your kingdom, don't you want anybody to be able to pick up the book and be able to read it? So Max, how do you respond to that?
So is he a Protestant or a Catholic or Eastern Orthodox
He's Catholic.
Oh, actually, I would agree with him on that one. For a couple of reasons. One,
wait, does that make a difference though?
It makes a difference.
Well,
So it makes a difference which denomination you are. Okay.
Tribalism.
Okay.
I was about to say that the denomination that he's on shouldn't make a
He's
difference.
one of my
but
people.
okay.
I'm gonna agree with him.
Anyway,
No,
go ahead, Max.
it's
Go ahead,
not
Max.
that. It's not okay. It's not that. It's for a specific reason. If he was a Protestant and he said that, then I'd be like, yeah, that's kind of been the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox point of view. It seems very inconsistent for you to leave the church, say sola scriptura, and then say lay people shouldn't read the Bible. But if he's a Catholic, I would understand that, mostly because the scriptures are written to be liturgical. These were the books that were approved to be read in church by the bishops. Now, for most of human history, the masses were illiterate. They couldn't read, and which is another reason why I don't take the Protestant doctrine of the Bible alone very seriously. Why would God dictate his sole means of revelation through a book most people for history couldn't read? The understanding was the Bible was supposed to be transmitted, the written word was supposed to be transmitted through the church and its traditions, just like the doctrines preserved by oral transmission from bishops to bishops, which were then consecrated through various councils.
Mhm.
And the reason, and if you want to see a good reason why we lay people shouldn't have access to the Bible without at least some kind of supervision and approval of works by the hierarchy, look at Protestantism and how denominationally fragmented they are. You have
Can I ask you a question?
Lutherans. Yeah, sure.
Sure,
I
let
think it's kind of funny.
hold on 1 second. Let me ask him this question. I'm gonna ask you the same question that I asked Pragmatic Culture, and then we'll let Steve ask his question, and then we'll move on to the actual discussion. But if you were a god, right, and you took all of this time to create mankind, you shaped the earth, the universe, everything in it, down to, minute detail. Wouldn't it make sense that you write a book that, number one, everybody can understand, because you want everybody to come to heaven? Let's say that they're in a situation where there's nobody around to read it. We could get into that situation. Wouldn't you want somebody to be able to just pick it up and understand without having a priest explain everything to you? And wouldn't you want it to be in such specific detail that you wouldn't have the splintering off of the church? You wouldn't have one denomination saying that, oh, this is what this verse means, this is what this verse means. You would want them very specific and very instructive, so there's no question, and then people could choose whether they want to follow it or not.
No, I wouldn't. And for a couple of specific reasons. One is I want my people to be united, which means I want them to be interdependent upon one another. If anyone could just go to the Bible and just get what they needed sufficiently, then you wouldn't have a united people, similar to the nation of Israel, which was united by
What if your
means of
Bible
a
said to
national
be
contract.
united?
What if it said to be
But
united? Well,
but
it
If the
does.
Bible
doesn't
commanded to be,
It does the
if the
opposite.
Bible, then, well, hold on. If the Bible does command to be united, then that whole point falls flat. Because if everybody can read the Bible and can understand that it's a commandment by God, ergo they would want to obey that commandment, and one of the commandments is for them to be united, then the argument that they should be united and therefore they should have to rely on each other for reading the Bible falls on its own butt.
Not necessarily, because there's a distinction to be had between motivation and knowledge. Someone can know something, but they could not be motivated to do so. However, somebody could be put in a specific circumstance where they are motivated to do so, given their environment and all else considered. So, for example, it might. For example, if someone commands me, don't do drugs, it's going to be a little easier if I'm in an environment where there are very few drugs available, as opposed to one where there's a lot of drugs available. So likewise, if you also want to create an apparatus, say the church, where people can be united or are much easier to be united, especially when you need common things like the sacraments, common things like rituals, all these other things. Not to mention,
this is fascinating. I was just going to say, this is fascinating. It is. It's a good topic.
This sounds like a conversation that I'd actually like us to have at a later date.
It is not why we are here. Sure. We need to.
And I just think it's funny you need. I just think it's funny that you need parental supervision to read the Bible. It's like that's just bizarre to me for some reason. I don't get it at all. I mean, never heard anything like that. we have to explain to you what the Bible is because you're just not confident to be able to read words. Okay.
Well, not only that, but when you say, Max, that you don't want to do that because you want it to unite people, you want it to be not so clear because you want that kind of intermingling in the uniting. The Bible actually had that opposite effect. It's actually responsible for splitting people as far away from each other as possible. But I mean,
only when lay people got access to it, though.
We'll have to leave it. This is something that we can definitely come back to. I think
because I actually might side with Max on this one a little more than you, Kyle. But I think this is a conversation that I'd actually really like to have with Max at a later point when we have time for this specific conversation, because this is actually a really interesting one that I'd like to have.
Throw me a date anytime on your channel.
Wait. Yeah, so wait, the actual debate that you're supposed to have tonight, Suris, is not interesting to you?
the actual debate. Well, first of all, it's a discussion.
Okay, whatever. He's not interested.
It is interesting. It is. Actually, no. My point.
You got other things to do. We don't want to bore you, man. You got things to do. Go, whatever.
Actually, my point was that both of these both the discussion that we're having right now, the smaller one that's tangential, and the discussion we're supposed to be having, are both conversations I'd like to have, and I'd like to have both of them with Max. Like this is something that I'd like to do. That's what I'm saying.
Well, you're getting ready to get your wish now, because aside from the fact that I want to let everybody know to go and make sure you vote for the Golden Nuns. There are 3 weeks left for the first round. You can go to tinyurl.com/Golden Nuns and vote for your favorite content creators, animators, video of the year, debate of the year. There's 22 categories, so go and do that. We've had a good big response. Some categories are being landslided. Some are up for grabs and neck and neck. So and surprisingly enough, the one of the choices on there is the theist debater from this show. So in the non-sex specific shows, we have a category, the theist debater, and I've listed 4 of the theist debaters that we've had on here, and that one is going completely opposite of how I thought it would. I thought I had a good indicator of how it's going to go, but not at all, and that's surprising. But yeah, Steve, you got anything else announcement wise?
No, let's get it going, man. Let's do it.
Oh, Dr. John Kroon on Saturday will be taking on the Plain Truth, who's a flat earther. So Dr. Kroon versus
oh boy, another one of those.
He's been waiting for a flat earther. He's been begging for one.
And we've been good, guys. We haven't had a flat earth debate in a month. So
true. Maybe I'm still feeling burned from the one that I had on my channel.
We're going through withdrawals.
Yeah, I'm shaking.
Who
flat earth withdrawal?
Yeah, which one was on your channel?
Wonton.
I had a multi-tom. Oh, yeah, no, it wasn't wonton. It was a multi-tom-tom.
Multi-tom-tom was a troll, dude.
Well, he was the only one who we managed to get on. So.
Oh yeah.
So let's get this started, guys. To start out with, I'm going to let you guys take a couple of minutes to introduce yourselves. Let everybody know who you are, where your channels, any kind of social media, that sort of thing that you want to do, and then we'll jump right to it. So let's start with the our first time guest, Max. Go ahead and introduce yourself and plug your channel.
All right. Hello, my name is Max. I've had quite a multitude of channels, but just call me CF, short for Catholic Fusionist. You could follow me on Twitter at Catholic Fusion letter I, and also the Catholic Fusionist on YouTube. I don't upload that much. The semester is starting off for my school year, so don't expect too much in the way of video content. And yeah, I'm a Catholic. I'm fairly conservative politically, and I do lean kind of libertarian on a few issues.
That's always a good method. The promise less, deliver more method. If you say don't expect a lot of content and you upload quite a few, then people can be nothing but happy with you. All right, Suris.
All right. My name is Suris. My channel is youtube.com/SurisSkeptic. I also have a Twitter at the same time that's at SurisSkeptic. I generally I like to focus a little bit on philosophy on my channel. I like to focus on a series I like to call Dangers of Woo, where I deal with faith healing and crystals and different methods that people use that are not really naturalistic or scientific and can't be proven. And then I also have video responses as well, because every skeptic channel has to have video responses or they lose their ability to be a skeptic channel, I guess. It's like a law of the world. But those are the things I like to focus on my channel.
Excellent. And I want to address a point that someone is already asking in the live chat, and it was a point that that we did acknowledge, and because of scheduling issues, it didn't work out. But yes, I do realize that there are 4 men in the room talking about abortion. That's just going to have to be something that
the irony of it is not lost on any of us.
Right. We're going to have to all be adults and pretend like that guys can have these conversations too. But we did attempt to get a female on here to the scheduling didn't work out. So yes, Matt.
All I can say is I'm very disappointed that the commenter assumed my gender. That's it.
I can be the girl for the day. I'm kidding.
I'm fat enough to have boobs. Do I count as the woman?
Okay, so let's do this for the purpose. Hey,
I'm technically should be the woman here.
Yeah, he's closest. So for the purpose of this discussion, let's all just assume our identity is female for today. Okay.
Sounds good.
We're gender fluid. I'm a female. Do I have to talk like one? I don't know how it works.
No.
Okay, my roommates will really be wondering what the hell's going on if I start doing that. They think I'm going into like Chatterbait or something to make money or something.
Matt, did you just sass snap? Did you just sass snap?
Yes, I did. I did. What is it?
Perfect.
4.
All right.
3 snaps in a Z formation.
Oh man.
Do.
Okay.
Nah, I can't. I'm too bad.
So which one of you two want to kind of kick things off? We're going to do this in not a debate format. It's not going to be rigid or structured. It's going to be a back and forth conversation, like a discussion. I only ask that you don't talk over each other, because the audience won't be able to understand what you're saying, and it just gets garbled and it's just aggravating. So just at least let the person finish their thought out, and we will give you all the time that you need to get that out. So who'd like to start out?
Actually, could I begin by asking Suris a question?
Sure.
I understand you're a former Christian, at least by what I've seen on your channel.
Mm-hmm.
While you were a Christian, were you also pro-life and then switched over, or did one not necessarily follow the other? Maybe I'd be interested in if you could start from there.
What's funny about that is that when it comes to most of my dispositions, a lot of them really didn't change when I went from when I officially went from not being a Christian anymore to being a religious non, as I slowly moved into just being an atheist. So a lot of my dispositions changed mostly in high school. Funnily enough, though, pro-life versus pro-choice was not a conversation that I actually even considered, because it simply didn't come up in my area. So it wasn't even something that was on my radar until maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And about 5-ish years ago, I was still technically Christian. I was non-denominational, didn't go to church, but still very much considered myself a Christian. And I held a pro-choice position during that, and have maintained it, though probably refined a little bit from that point on. So I wouldn't say that my religious disposition has ever really had much of an effect on that particular stance of mine.
Mm-hmm. Oh, all right. That's cool. I've kind of, for me, it always seemed kind of tied, but I wasn't. So I was born and raised kind of nominally Eastern Orthodox. My parents had that religion. I didn't practice it. I became an atheist sometime in high school up until my second year of university. And then I had a few experiences, became a Christian again. But it wasn't really until like a few years into that where I switched over from being, personally against abortion, but, supporting it legally, to just going over to the pro-life side. And it was kind of since then where I've adopted it, not necessarily because of, how should I put this? I adopted it mostly because when you were with a community that holds that political position, and even though you personally might be against it, you kind of get exposed to more of the arguments, because up here in Canada, it's a given. Even our Conservative Party will not touch that issue with a 10-foot pole because it's so ingrained into our political system. So I've kind of had the same.
Whereas here in America, there's a rife debate on it.
Mm-hmm. Even though, like, how long has Roe v. Wade been settled for? Since the 70s?
So that's a really interesting. It's a really interesting question. Not because I'm trying to like do a Jordan Peterson style deflection on it, but it's interesting because it's settled as a matter of precedent functionally. But a lot of law professors will not say that it's like a lot of them will not flat out say that it's settled. Though we do have cases in 1973, 1982, and 1992 respectively that are all grounded on Roe v. Wade. As a matter of being settled, at least when Kavanaugh was being spoken with, he still wouldn't even say so much that it was fully settled. In 1973, I think. I actually had the stuff on that pulled up here if I can find it. Casey versus Planned Parenthood was the 1992 talk that was settled on it. 1982 there was one in Pennsylvania that was taken into account. And I could have sworn there was one in 1973, but the debates began in 1973, where the decisions from Roe v. Wade stemmed from.
From what I recall, it's not necessarily Roe v. Wade itself is not necessarily split along pro-life versus pro-choice lines, because from what I'm aware of, there are people who are pro-choice but think it should be more of a state's issue, and then again, there are people who would like to think that it is a constitutional protection that abortion is protected, but at the same time, don't think the decision was properly made. I believe Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself didn't think it should have been predicated upon a doctor's right to privacy, but something closer to the actual issue of women's autonomy.
Well, the right to privacy was something that was established not just as a doctor's rights to privacy. During Roe v. Wade, right to privacy was just something that was handled almost universally by it. So, doctor's right to privacy, patient's right to privacy. Even if two homosexual individuals wanted to engage in sexual actions, their right to privacy is also something that's been referenced to in Roe v. Wade as well. So just the right to privacy, not just the doctor's right to privacy, is something that it considers. It just so happens that one of the rights to privacy that is entailed under Roe v. Wade is the right for a woman to make a private decision. One of those decisions being decisions involving her body or her bodily autonomy.
Right. And right now, I believe the major issue is how, if there is a conservative majority, how it will go about being rendered obsolete. Either it'll be directly put down, or, as my friend Ed Brighton once said, it will die the death of 1,000 cuts, where essentially it becomes less and less relevant over time.
If it were to go, I think it would probably take the death of 1,000 cuts, because what has happened with Roe v. Wade is that since it was established, it's actually been kind of either maneuvered around or been reshaped in some ways by legislation. I have a whole landmark cases article pulled up of different legislation that has changed things based on Roe v. Wade. For instance, one of the things that was changed changed with Roe v. Wade was the 24-hour wait period that some states have. If you go in to ask a doctor, hey, I would like to terminate my pregnancy, you might have a 24-hour wait period where you consider there's a consulting period that you have to go through before you can actually terminate the pregnancy. It's not, you can go in, get it done, and then leave in some states. And that's a fundamental reshaping of some of the ideas in Roe v. Wade. So if it were to be taken out, that would be the only way I could see it going, because that's the way that it's been. That's the method of attack that has happened from the point of inception onward. Though it does bring up a question. I'd like to ask you a question as well, if that's all right. Sure. So you said that you originally held the stance of not being pro-abortion, but essentially being pro-choice, because you were going to take the legal precedent, which is my stance. Actually, I'm not pro-abortion. I'm pro-choice. It just happens to be that a woman's right to choose entails that. My question to you would be: would you make an exception? As an example, this is probably an extreme example, but would you make an exception for a victim of sexual assault?
Oh, could I just clarify something about my own position first, and then go to the victim of sexual assault question? When I
Sure, that's
said,
fine.
right, when I said I was for it legally, what I meant was my own position was that if assuming that I agreed with my church that the unborn was in all respects a human person. However, where I
Okay.
disagreed with was I didn't believe that the government had a right to force somebody to sustain a person alive. While it was essentially something like um, how do I put like the violinist argument in essence.
Okay.
I didn't like. I don't believe the government should be able to force me to, give up a kidney or an organ to keep a family member alive. But in
Mhm.
terms of but in terms of my own moral principles, yes, I would extend it to cases of incest and sexual assault. But could I ask you a question in return?
That's fine.
Cool. Um, in terms of actually, yeah, just to comment on that. While that is my own position, in terms of compromise, I think that abortion at the pro-life versus pro-choice side is more of a spectrum than purely you're either one side or another. Like,
Oh, there's definitely nuance
right,
to it. There's definitely nuance to
right.
it. There are
My, my,
pro-choicers who, for instance, are pro-choice up into the 23-week mark, whereas there are
mhm,
pro-choicers who are pro-choice under any and all circumstances. And then there are ones that sit anywhere on the spectrum. Same thing with pro-life. I know certain pro-life individuals who actually hold the up until the 23-week mark, even though they consider themselves pro-life. So I agree with you. There's nuance, and it is a
right.
spectrum.
Right. So I know that there are people who are very uncomfortable with, my far more pro-life position. But I kind
Mhm.
of take Groucho Marx's mentality on this one. These are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others. Essentially, I
Well,
know that there are a lot of
that's fair.
I, I know that there
Oh,
are a lot of people who wouldn't go that far with me, but what I would do is at least give them arguments why they should consider abortion up until that point to be legally unacceptable. And I'm perfectly comfortable even granting that the unborn isn't actually a human being because I think that there are good consequentialist arguments for it. Um,
And I'm personally
and
comfortable granting that
Mhm.
it's a human being from point of conception onward if need be.
Right,
For the sake of
right,
conversation, I can grant that.
exactly. And I think when you kind of work within the discourse and realize that there are various viewpoints all along the spectrum, I think it's really more of a matter of trying to convince the other person to move along to my side of the spectrum, as opposed to where they might have
Mhm.
started off with. And that's where I would kind
Well,
of gauge the arguments.
if I might want to interject, I understand that we're talking about your personal moral position, but
Hmm.
when it comes to this debate, me and you can have our own personal moral positions all day long, and we can justify them. And this is a conversation we can have, and I'm perfectly fine going down this route. Though I think the more pragmatic path would be discussing what should be legislation.
Right.
Because even though you and I can have our own personal moral dispositions and we can have our justifications and we can have our philosophers that we quote, or sometimes not even philosophers, just people that we admire, that we can quote in order to justify those positions better. And we can refine them to the point where, we started with a rock as our art, we've refined it to the point where it's crystal. We
Hmm.
still would be nowhere in the legislation argument. So I'd like to dial back to my original
Gotcha.
question. Your stance on when you say your stance on sexual assault, you said that it is a matter of your moral principles that you would allow
Hmm.
for cases of incest, cases of sexual assault, rape, things of that nature. You would allow for those. Do you also believe, because these are two separate conversations, that the legal precedent should also favor those?
The legal precedent, it depends on the country itself. In terms of my
I
own country,
it doesn't
uh,
matter. Hold on,
right.
hold on. Before
Okay.
and I'm not trying to interrupt for the sake of being a dick, but I need to, if I don't interject at the beginning when there's already an issue,
Mm.
then later on down the road I'll have trouble backpedaling to find out where it was.
Okay.
I
okay, Matt
don't
Dillahunty.
care about I know, right? Um, but I hold issue with the in my country portion, because right now we're just dealing with, for instance, the conversation was on Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade only
Right,
extends to one country. So we're going to frame this, if we frame America as just the country we're dealing with, then we're not going to move around the borders unless you want to cite another country as an example,
that's what I was
as
actually
against
doing.
or for your position. Okay, cool.
Oh, that's exactly what I was doing. So in my own country, I don't think I'd be able to get as far as just defunding abortion. Like, it's pretty stagnant here. It's not going to go anywhere unless there's some kind of shift in mentality. That's the best I can do. Whereas if I was an American citizen, what I would focus on doing is making it more along the lines of a state-to-state thing, pushing against Roe v. Wade, and even if I could, just protect the unborn as a person, if that was at all
Okay.
constitutionally possible. Which I've heard some people have taken it to that extreme, but even Scalia thought that the Constitution only applied to legal persons, not necessarily the unborn.
Yeah, and Roe v. Wade there's been a lot of people who've argued that Roe v. Wade is tied to the 14th Amendment pretty harshly. And there's some arguments that I agree with and some arguments I don't there. I do like that you brought up the violinist argument. If you don't mind, if I could refine the violinist argument a little bit to see where you might stand on it. So the violinist argument has a few issues with it. I like citing it because it's an argument in favor of my position, obviously. Well, one of the only issues I have with the violinist argument is that pregnancy is its own thing, and all analogies by their very nature are flawed. So the violinist analogy has some flaws with it when it comes to being applied to pregnancy, even though that was the original purpose of its creation in that book. Instead of the violinist, let's say that it's a parent who legally has to give a kidney to the child. Refine that further, and let's say that it's a parent who has a genetic kidney issue that they know would likely pass down to their child. Would you still say that this parent has a legal responsibility to donate the kidney? I think that's a much more refined version of the violinist argument we could actually address.
No, but I don't think the analogy holds up. And here's why. Right. So in these cases, these are very individual and marginal, and some might say, well, how is that kind of related to the moral issue behind all of this? Well, I think in principle there are some cases when it amounts to a huge enough populace that bodily autonomy has to go by the wayside. So, for example, if there was a huge endemic where people had to be forcibly um, vaccinated against their will, then yes, I am fine just throwing bodily autonomy by the wayside, because there's a huge amount of the population that risks death in exchange for people just holding their breath and saying, no, this is my body. So
true,
that's...
but you understand why that is, though, right?
Why? What is?
Why the issue of bodily autonomy applies there just as in every other one? Because for instance, your right to punch me in the face stops somewhere around where my face begins. So in the when you bring up vaccinations, your right to not you or a child vaccinated stops somewhere where an uninoculated child who can be vaccinated exists.
Oh no, what I was saying was, my thought experiment, the scenario applied to even adults. I don't even think adults should be able to stomp their feet and say my bodily autonomy. And when it comes to that and the cause of pain to other people, or even death in that case, I think that the death of the huger amount of people is enough to override that bodily autonomy. And the reason why I think that same logic applies to cases of abortion is, if you make it a precedent that any mother can, by law, at any point kill the unborn, assuming it is a human person for the sake of this conversation, then what happens is you kind of create this huge societal precedent. Whereas with a more marginal case like the kidney, it doesn't amount to that huge. It doesn't amount to the population as much.
Well, I can agree with that, and that's why when I brought up the vaccination thing, there's a reason that I think the vaccination thing holds true, but not necessarily in the favor that you're thinking. So when you bring up vaccinations, you're saying that a person should not be able to stomp their feet and claim my bodily autonomy, because their rights end where another person's begin. Correct?
Right.
Because
Correct.
when that person's rights for their own personal health, however you wish to define it, here it would be medical health, their rights begin there, and that's where the other individual's rights stop. Like, for instance, if I knew I had smallpox, I was a carrier, and I went out, I would then be on some level responsible, even if just on a moral level, for the dangers that I put other people in. I can understand the issue of bodily autonomy being presented there. My issue, though, is that if I grant, and I'm willing to, as I said, for the sake of conversation, I'm willing to grant a fetus full personhood from the point of conception, and its bodily autonomy, its autonomy to itself, its own life and everything, will still stop somewhere along the mother's uterine wall.
Mm-hmm. But if you forcibly remove it, that causes death. Like, it's not just a ceasing; it's an active killing, at least in most cases.
Yes, so for instance, when I brought up the your right to punch me in the face stops somewhere where my face is. This is why we have things like a right to defend yourself, because you do not there's no point where my body is able to be used for you for method of punching bag, experimentation, etc. I think that still holds with a mother's body. The mother, if we grant that the mother and the child both have their own rights, the child, at least while they are inside the mother, their rights do stop where the mother's rights begin. And one of the rights that the mother has is a right to their own body. The reason that this has to hold is because, for instance, if I can ask you a question, because this will determine the course of the conversation. What do you consider consent to sex to be? Is consent to sex equal to consent to pregnancy?
Is consent to sex equal to consent to pregnancy? No, I don't believe because the mother consents to one that it necessarily entails she consents to the other. However, I also don't. Right. I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. So if the consent to sex doesn't lead to the consent to pregnancy, do you think that consent to pregnancy is consent to keep pregnancy?
I think so long as the health of some. I think so. You have a duty to any person, just not to kill them. Even if there is a homeless person in my own house, I can have them removed. That's one thing, but I couldn't dismember them and throw them off my property. I think there is a bit of a difference there. Mm-hmm.
There is a bit of a difference there, and this is the reason why analogies are all flawed in their own way. Something being analogous to a situation will never make it equal. I can grant you that, and I can agree with that. I think, though, when everything does boil down to bodily autonomy, at what point does this, and we assume that the world is how it is, because obviously this conversation changes with technology, but we assume that right now we have a case where the woman has a right to choose whether or not her body is going to be used for this individual. Currently, this was a study done in 2010. The chances of a mother dying the chances of a mother dying during pregnancy is 30 times higher from carrying the pregnancy full to term. In the modern world, these are statistics taken, in the United States. So in the modern world, we have access to this technology, is still 30 times higher than that of when a mother goes to get an abortion. If you want to look at the statistics for this is on, actually I have it pulled up here, and I can give you that afterwards if you would like. But point being, it's orders of magnitude safer. What's up?
Oh, I was actually going to ask, what is the risk in itself? Oh, I'm asking, what is the risk of her getting killed from an abortion on its own?
The risk itself is, from the 2010 study that was done, it is 0.6 versus 100,000. In 100,000 cases, on average, there are 0.6 deaths statistically. So you'd have to actually have like 135,000 for a single death, for there to be a death resulting from complications of an abortion versus 30 times more than that for just carrying to term due to complications that result in pregnancy in general.
Right. And in that case, if let's see, so in that same population, that would be like 18. Just to multiply 0.6 by 30. In that case, what would the chances be of, like, just to take a similar case with between that and vaccination? What are the chances of, for example, dying of a vaccine as compared to an abortion? Like, chances are
as far as the vaccines,
yeah,
there have been vaccine-related illnesses, but the actual chances from vaccine are still much, much lower than actually allowing something to fully go through. The difference with the vaccine argument, and I'm willing to have that one at a later date too if need be, but the difference with the vaccine argument is the vaccine itself is a preventative measure. We use it as a preventative measure to prevent death later on down the line once we know that we have a viable human being. We have to give it a certain number of vaccines in order to prevent it from either hurting the population at large or hurting itself. This is just something that we do as a modern society in order to make sure that we can actually have people that are still functioning.
Right.
When it comes to, I don't necessarily think that this can be used the same way when dealing with abortion, because abortion and pregnancy are their own isolated issues. And I don't think that the issue with vaccines is even really analogous to it outside of the bodily autonomy argument that you brought up earlier. I think there it can function, but I don't think that here, when we're dealing with statistics on harm, it really can be viewed as a quick cable.
Right. So in this case, I would actually do more of a cost benefit analysis overall. So you already mentioned that there is a risk to personal life when it comes to doing so. Just like on more utilitarian or consequentialist grounds. If one compares it in terms of happiness, there are a few things to consider. For example, with an abortion, there is at least one person, assuming it is a person, who is going to die 100% of the time. And most people have lives that they're happy to live. Most of us aren't suicidal. Most of us don't think or regret that life was ever worth living. At least there's been no major study to that as far as I know, anecdotally. Also, there are also, if you look at what happiness can come about, there's currently an excess amount of people who are looking to adopt. And when I say that, I don't mean any child. It's usually newborns. Chances are, if you're regrettably, if you're 6 or over, it's an uphill battle. But in the United States, for example, most people want to adopt newborns. Most of them are even willing to go to other countries, but can't do so. And according to one article in The Economist, by 1975, the number had fallen halfway, mostly because of legalized abortion. There's like 18,000 infants under the age of 2 who are ready for adoption. But in 1971, it was like 90,000 children. So there are a lot of people go ahead.
So speaking on current statistics, the current statistics right now are showing that there are, and this is definitely more than likely a result of the age discrimination, but not even necessarily just on age discrimination. In the United States alone, there are 428,000 thereabouts children within our foster care network per year, and that 428,000 is added to yearly. It's added to quite a lot yearly, actually. Conversely, there's only about 135,000 children per year that are actually adopted in the United States. And obviously, most of the children that are in the system, if they are not adopted in that first year, and we know based on this that at least 2/3 of them won't be adopted. At the very least, 2/3 of them won't be adopted. Their chances of being adopted get smaller and smaller to the point where, like you said, around age 6, the chances of them being adopted are probably not, they're simply not going to be there. This is actually one of the reasons why me personally, as a personal anecdote, I'm probably not going to actually have a child. I'm going to adopt. Me and my girlfriend have both already agreed on this. We're going to adopt at least once, if not 3 times, if we can help it, because we are aware of those statistics and we'd like to do something against those statistics. I agree those statistics are there. Those statistics seem like they would be more in favor, they would be more in favor of my position than yours. I'm willing to let you dig the hole if you'd like, but I'd also like to catch it if I can.
Right. Well, I'd also right. So one of the things that I did point out was that there's for how many children are in the system, there are an ample amount of parents who do want to adopt. It seems to me that It seems to me like by pushing or leaning on the abortion side, we're making the wrong inference here, which is not how do we keep kids from going into the system, but rather how we can. What measures can we make such that more people can adopt or even be eligible for adopting? That's kind of
this is one of the reasons.
Right.
This is one of the reasons why in the United States a lot of people actually do go. I had teachers in high school and in my public education system who did this. They would actually go to China because they had a surplus of children they were trying to get rid of. Is really the best way to describe it. As much as I don't like the hyperbolic meaning behind getting rid of a human being, but really that's what it is. So I do know that is what happens in reality because I have actually talked to people who have raised children that they've gotten in foster care from other countries, both because they deem the problems of those countries to either be greater than ours or because it is much easier. There's about a 2-year, I believe, waiting period you have to go through where you're just dealing with paperwork in order to actually adopt in the United States. If it's not 2 years, it's definitely it's enough to prevent a lot of people from actually going through with the process. It's also an incredibly expensive process, which means that if you are financially stable, you still might not be financially viable to even adopt. Even if you would be able to sustain the child, the system in place right now is not sustainable for even bringing those children in. So I can agree that there's definitely something that needs to be reformed there, make it easier to adopt, while also making it easier to identify parents that will be able to adopt and not harm the children, because this is an issue we find with animal adoptions a lot of times, is that if you make it too easy to adopt something, then you open the door to abuse.
Mm-hmm. Right. Although one tried and true argument that comes from, I believe, I'd say your side of the argument is, well, in gay adoption as an example of a group of people who could adopt and aren't. I believe, I believe this could be an opportunity to make that argument more forcefully, or at the very least, if there were more children in the system, then focus on that rather than the abortion fight. But again, this is even if one was to take a look at people just going through the system, even though they were adopted and going on to adulthood, even we believe that most of them have lives worth living, and even lives that can contribute to a net positive as well, even if they never do find someone to adopt. Their life alone should go towards the benefit side. It's just that if they are adopted, and there are people who are looking to adopt, that's just an extra benefit to go with that. And could I go forward with another point, or is there something in there you'd like to respond to? I don't want to, gish gallop on you.
No, I understand, and I actually respect. This is one of the reasons why I'm fine having another conversation with you. I figured this was around how the conversation was going to go. Is you're avoiding the more dishonest tactics, and I respect you for that. So thank you.
It's too respectful. I need y'all to step it up. It's too respectful. Start throwing things or something.
If you'd like, I do
more
have
later.
Did we bring the weapons?
That
we got the guns.
We got the weapon right here. If we need to.
You're not doing like the. I didn't mean for it to piss him off, Max. I'm sorry, buddy. Come back.
I don't have much, but I do have this Max, cane that I could beat you with pretty nicely.
Max, I personally want to thank you for wearing pants today, by the way.
Yeah, that would have been really awkward if you got up there and there were no pants.
I personally want to not thank you for not wearing pants.
Don't worry, Kyle. I promise not to wear. Don't worry, Kyle. I promise not to wear pants next time.
Thank you.
All these years I always wondered, but on that below that desk, yes or no? Now I know. All right.
Fair enough.
I don't know why I'm thinking about what's below the desk. That's creepy.
So creepy, Steve. So creepy.
I know.
So I think what it boils down to for Steve is that he's lonely, and what I think it boils down to for Max is run.
Not that long.
It'd be the Captain
I am so glad I don't have daddy issues right now.
Oh God.
Who?
Oh, the Steve Fusionist. The Steve Fusionist.
Oh God.
Oh,
we have a name. We have a name for the ship, and it's horrible.
Yeah. No,
Yeah. I think we
going
need
down.
to get on the topic of getting on topic. I do think that as much as I'd like to focus on the adoption statistics, because I obviously have those available as well, just because I figured where we're probably going to walk in this conversation. Unfortunately, it's a conversation that's been had so many times by so many people that there's only so many avenues it can go down anymore. As much as I'd like to stay on the adoption one, it is a separate issue to the abortion issue. However, one does entail the other, because once you start arguing for a more pro-life position, you do have to also argue for the consequent, which is reformatting the adoption program to allow for more people to be adopted, because I don't think there's really much of a debate on how well kids who stay in the system and only grow up in the system turn out. Statistically, it's not very well. They don't have a very high measure of happiness. And if we're going to make any argument for human happiness, we need to make an argument for reformatting things so that human happiness can be expanded. That said, again, I do think that adoption is its own separate issue. If we were to dial back into abortion, so one of the questions I would have, and I know it's a question that a lot of people in the country have right now with the current political sphere, because it has been brought up quite a few times. We know that Roe v. Wade is kind of the linchpin for a lot of this stuff, and we know that it's going to be restructured over the years, if not taken out completely, if that's the road that people want to go down. I personally hope it's not, because I believe in the right to bodily autonomy, right to privacy. But if Roe v. Wade were taken out and we were to lose these things, there are a few things that would be hurt by it outside of just abortion: the right to privacy, a right to die, a right to choose, and even some of those are in contention. A right to die is something that's been in contention for years. That's a separate conversation that I'd be fine having as well. Not one for here. That's a rabbit hole.
That's a thing. That's a thing on its own.
Yeah,
yes.
Definitely. So one of the things that I did want to kind of focus on, in the 1950s and 60s, deaths from illegal abortions ranged, in the conservative estimates, set them at about 200,000. And if you want to take all deaths of entailment, so deaths from depression as a result afterwards, everything from illegally obtaining abortions, you sit with a metric of somewhere about 1.2 million, according to the Guttmacher Institute. This was all before Roe v. Wade, because 1950s and 60s, obviously. 1973 and on is when we start really discussing this topic. If we were to repeal Roe v. Wade, I don't think there's really an argument to be had that can get us away from going back to those statistics. If one of the arguments you want to have, especially when talking about adoption, is human happiness, and we both agree that human happiness is something that needs to be expanded, because otherwise what's the point of living your life? Whether or not we agree on an afterlife, we want to at least make sure that this life that we're in is good. We want to make sure that at least this run is good in some form or measure. So what would you say when dealing with those statistics? Because you're going to have to face them as soon as something like Roe v. Wade is repealed.
Right. So a few things. One, these statistics were taken mostly in the 1970s. This was at a time when we did not have great access to mental health. Therapy and psychology were not as well developed as they are today. Antidepressants were not as prevalent, which I'm sorry to all those naturalists out there, but it is much better than a breath of fresh air. And a second thing to take into account is abortion in itself does have a proclivity on its own to lead to abortion, whether illegally obtained or not. There's a pretty good article called, here it is, What Happens to Women Who Are Denied Abortion? It was written by Joshua Lang. And this is what he writes. When researcher Diana Green Foster looked at more objective measures of mental health over time, rates of depression and anxiety. She also found no correlation between having an abortion and increased symptoms. In a working paper based on her study, Foster notes that women's depression and anxiety symptoms either remained steady or decreased after a 2-year period of receiving abortion, and that, in fact, initial and subsequent levels of depression symptoms were similar between those who received an abortion and those who were turned away. Turnaways did, however, suffer from higher levels of anxiety, but 6 months out, there was no appreciable difference between the two groups. But what's even more incredible is that Lang says that there is, despite women going under the poverty line after having a child actually had no effect on the depression rate itself.
So I know you're making an argument from psychology, and
Right.
I'd like to bring something up. So this is when you're dealing with human psychology and you're dealing with overall human happiness in a certain measure, you can only measure in the moment or roughly around the time of in the moment. The best example of this is studies that have been done on people who have won the lottery. People who've won the lottery, which inarguably increase their level of happiness for a great amount of time, their level of happiness ended up going back to where it was stably after a while. This is a standard human defense mechanism that we have that allows us to continue through everyday life, even when we're dealing with extreme highs or extreme lows. It's pretty much just part of the human condition. It's part and parcel of it. So my issue with how that argument's worded in that article is that this is what we would expect in all circumstances, because we see it when it comes to lottery winners. So even granting that the psychology was not as well understood then, now that we understand the psychology better, I don't think that the article that you're citing is a point in favor for you, because it's only in that immediate 6-month area that we really can measure human happiness, because it has a tendency to stabilize after the point of pretty much after the point of no return.
Mm-hmm. Well, a couple of things. One, it's not just about understanding, it's also about treating. So we have to take that into account as well. The women who suffered from these psychological problems in the 1970s also didn't have the same level or access to the treatment that we do today. The medication wasn't as well innovated. And the second thing to take into account is how poverty seemed to have little effect with that. Not necessarily just with the depression, going down, but just maintaining after that time. But also, we would expect, would we not, that the poverty would actually just perpetuate the depression onward, rather than just take you to where it initially was before they were under the poverty line?
So what we find is there is a point of stability. I think it's sitting at around somewhere in the $70,000 a year was when it was taken last, but this was like, I believe that particular study was done about 5 years ago. I'd have to look it up again, but it's around $70,000 or $73,000 that you don't generally get more or less happy from that point on. You just stabilize at that point. So once you do get above the poverty line, you do have that moment of stability. The problem, though, is that moment of stability clearly exists. So what'll happen when you have a mother who has an abortion and therefore can go on to have a more stable life on her own, whatever that may entail, there's going to be a point where she stabilizes. When you have a mother that is denied one, or a potential mother that is denied one, and then has to go on and carry everything through, whether they choose to adopt, if they even qualify for doing so, or if they decide that they're going to keep the child, what we have then is a point where they're going to stabilize as well, just like when you're dealing with poverty statistics. So there's going to be a point of stabilization. Because there's going to be a point of stabilization, you then have to try to figure out what is causing that stabilization. Because if the point of stabilization is equal, whether they get an abortion or not, then that part of the argument is basically axed. Now we have to deal with what was their anxiety levels beforehand. And from what you pointed out in that article, the anxiety levels were higher in the people who had actually been forced to carry everything to term and were denied. If we're dealing with their levels of anxiety, now we have an area where the net gain in happiness is smaller on your end, not on my end.
Right, but I think there is something biological to this. For a case in point, think of the endowment effect. Sometimes unwanted children. There's actually quite a bit of a phenomenon where once unwanted children who were neglected or not wanted by their parents actually become wanted after they are born. And it's actually something that comes to the dismay of parents looking to adopt once the child is given birth to and the would-be parent decides not to give up their child for adoption. So I think that there is good evidence to indicate that there is a biological component to this as well. We're animals, we're mammalian, we look after our kin, this is how we survive and adopt. It only makes sense this is what would perpetuate to the modern day.
It's true that giving birth will be something that might increase happiness because it is something that is hardwired in us. We are. This is one of the reasons why dopamine is administered to us from our bodies whenever we're having sex, because our bodies go, congratulations, you're doing the thing that will allow the human race to procreate, because as far as evolution is concerned, that's really all it cares about, is whether or not you can procreate. So yes, there could be a biological component there that will give some sort of increased happiness. Problem is, even granting for that, you still have to deal with statistics that you cite yourself, because that doesn't get you. That still doesn't get you away from those.
All right. Well, the happiness is happiness, even if it is biologically induced. After all, when you go down to the chemical components of things, all happiness is based off of that one reason or another. The second thing is, yes, that is true. It might be short-lived, but at the very least, it does assist or help a mother get back into this. There do seem to be some mechanisms that go towards stabilizing. And if there is a point of natural stability, then with modern medication today, it seems to me it would be a lot easier for us to take care of psychological problems than would have ever been available in the 1970s and beforehand too.
Okay, this is fair. You do have more access to mental health, and that's a conversation in and of itself. However, mental health is not the only reason that you have the statistic from the 1960s and 50s where deaths were resulted from abortion. Even with the conservative statistic, you have 200,000 deaths. That's the conservative statistic. You still have those numbers with or without your measurements of human happiness. Those numbers are still going to have to be addressed. And I can still see a world where we go back to those numbers, because if you are dealing with, you feel personally that you need an abortion, and there's a whole conversation over what that's defined as that's completely separate, because there are some people that think that plan B is abortion. Those people can shove their head down an ostrich hole for all I care, because they don't understand how a pill works. But when you have this, you seemed like there's something you wanted to say on that.
Yeah, I was kind of hesitant of whether or not I wanted to address the pill as abortion, but to be fair, I actually don't know, because here's the thing. I don't, at least from memory, have how the mechanism of the pill works. I know I am against it, but wait, I don't. I don't.
Why are you against? But why are you against it, though? I would like to ask that question. I'm not, without dealing with the. I can explain how it works real quick, and then you can give me your side. That way, you're not going in blind.
Oh, right. So, because life begins at the point of conception, at least when the sperm and the egg cell begin to merge and work as its own entity. So that's at the point where I believe human life starts and develops. But I remember also my case rests upon not necessarily convincing everyone that my position must be the correct one, but rather at least to make sure that they are more pro-life going after the debate than they were going into the debate, or leaving the debate when going into the debate. So really go ahead.
When it comes to issues of Plan P or Plan P, sorry, Plan B.
Wow.
Plan procreation. Yeah, that's
Right.
they've gone through several plans. When it comes to Plan B,
that
Plan
baby's
B
coming.
in its simplest form, Plan B is the same. It is the same stuff that's actually used for regular birth control. It's the same chemicals, just concentrated. They've got a lot in there in order to force the body to go into a state where it thinks it's already, I believe it's so it thinks it's already pregnant, so it's not actually going to accept any more sperm into the ovum. Functionally, that's how the birth control pill works. So the birth control pill in and of itself is not a method of abortion. It is just a high dose of birth control for the purposes of prevention.
Right.
It is prevention, not abortion.
Okay, so that's how the pill works. And Plan B is anything different? Does it
Plan B is so Plan B and the pill are the same thing. Just think of it as so you have a painkiller pill. You have an ibuprofen pill, 200 milligrams. That would be your birth control pill, not counting the ones that are used in the off kind, the sugar pills. That is your birth control pill. Your Plan B pill is equivalent essentially to a 2,500 milligram pill of ibuprofen. It is more of the same in most cases. Obviously, there's different chemicals that are used for different pills. But from my understanding, it's more of it to trigger what the birth control does on its own faster. That's what the Plan B pill does.
Right. And okay, so the triggering though, that is it enough to kill off, or at least, eject, yeah, a sperm and egg cell that have. Oh, sorry.
Well,
Am I coming clear?
I was just going to say the way he explained it was that it's sort of like a preventive measure. So it just stops the body from accepting that.
So to clarify something about how sperm works, there are some sperm who can't there are some sperm that it's half a person at this point that can make it to the egg within half an hour. Just they can immediately make it there. However, in more cases than not, it takes sperm several days to actually get to the egg. And then sperm can actually live on its own for about 48 to 72 hours. This is also, ironically, the active period for Plan B. It is going to actively prevent the sperm from doing anything while still technically existing. It's not, how to say it, it's not the same thing as forcing an early miscarriage, basically. That's not what the Plan B pill does.
Okay. All right. So if it's everything you described, then I don't really see an issue that's at the very least worth going into. And like I said, the main reason I didn't want to get into this is because I have less of an understanding of this, and I really just wanted to focus on where, in my own position, I'm more comfortable having the discussion rather than just starting, just taking the more harder stances that pro-lifers tend to take. This is why I'm. This is why I'm in this conversation. I'm more apt to allow or even not even discuss people women who got pregnant as a result of assaults.
And that's fair, and I can understand that. I'm actually it's good to have a conversation where somebody's stating these are my positions and these are the positions that would be entailed legally, versus somebody saying, well, because I'm this, my position is this. Because at that point, you're not arguing the person, you're arguing what they think they represent. It's a whole lot easier to argue the person.
Right.
That does bring up a question though. So your views on just contraceptives in general, you're okay with contraceptives then? Because Plan B would fall under a contraceptive.
So long as they're not funded by anyone's tax dollars.
So why would they need to not be funded by tax dollars?
Well, a couple of things. One, one, I'd consider it mostly as a result of my libertarianism. I believe that medical care should be covered out of pocket, or at least individually. I don't think it should be done under government tax dollars in general. Either
so what about people who can't afford it?
Charity. Charity should be in the main course of action. Municipal support should be fine, so long as it's easy to move in and out of county. I don't mind it being done on the local level, mostly because at least there, it's much easier to move in and out. Whereas if you act on a more national or even state or up here provincial level, it's far more binding everywhere, and it allows for more competition in terms of places with healthcare. Plus, I just think in general the market tends to provide the best means of healthcare in the long term. I don't really want to get into this issue too much.
You're saying that which market provides more healthcare in the long term?
Freer market. It provides a better means of healthcare and innovation.
Are you sure? Do you have a statistic for that?
You got about 10 minutes left. We're approaching the 90-minute mark here.
Okay, that's fine.
We've got somebody. The reason that I'm cutting off a few minutes early is because we've got Katie Paulson from Pathos. She's a Pathos writer.
She would like to come in coming in.
She would like to come in and give her thoughts on the so we'll have a woman's perspective. So we'll go for about 10 more minutes with you guys. Y'all can wrap up your points, and then we'll bring her in and see if she has any questions, or that way we can at least say we have the women's voice here.
Right. Then let's do this. I say we'll do a question or two for each of us, and then we can move to that, because I think that's for the most part, we're not, because this isn't a structured debate, we don't actually have to have like full on closing statements. So maybe just a little bit of back and forth still would be fine for the last bit. So you start.
Closing statements or just questions?
Just questions. I don't think we necessarily need closing statements. It's not a structured debate.
Oh yeah, that's true. All right. I guess my first question is, do you find when I speak about this in terms of rights versus that it's more appealing to you, or do you think the issue is more appealing to you when we talk about things like cost and benefit? More of a utilitarian approach. And by more convincing, I mean, is your own position more convinced with the rights arguments or the consequential positions?
So I think that the rights arguments are a little better for somebody like me, only because I think that when you're dealing with rights, it's a lot easier to quantify the consequences than if you're just dealing with the latter form that you mentioned. When we're dealing with human rights, it's a whole lot easier to convince somebody, especially like me, who I take the position that rights are always there. They're just taken away as needed, as we realize that certain things are problematic. This is basically what we did with vaccines, is we realized, okay, we need vaccines, so we need to take away some of the bodily autonomy of individuals in order to grant vaccines, in order to make sure that our population is safe. I think that the argument from rights is going to be much more functional when dealing with somebody like me.
Oh, all right, cool. I guess it's your turn, or do you want me to ask the second question?
I can ask my second one. So you mentioned before that a state-funded, or not state-funded, that a freer market for healthcare generally provides better healthcare. I would like to know where that argument stems from. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I've heard it a few times, and usually my interlocutor can't actually facilitate where they actually got that information from, and I'm curious.
Right. So if you look at markets more like a spectrum, usually even though the United States does have a lot of problems with its own medical care, in terms of actually being able to provide medical innovations, medicines, and even patents on medical equipment, it tends to be up there. I don't remember offhand, but I think it's right there alongside Japan and China. If I'll be happy to cite you a statistic in a bit, but in terms of the freer market being efficient overall for medical care, I would refer you to to look up the economist Brian Kaplan. He actually does a debate on medical care and makes a very strong case for it. And his interlocutor isn't bad. He provides a strong argument in return. So it's a good back and forth.
An argument from Steelman is much better than where one obliterates the other. You get a lot more from it.
Right. I'll be happy to provide a private link or even a public link for you guys as well, in case you guys want to share it too.
And I'm happy to take a look at it, because the last time that I looked at the statistics on it, most of your free markets ranked in the low 40s compared to other countries when it came to healthcare. Like the United States was actually sitting at rank 37 when I looked at it last.
In terms, World Health Organization statistic. Am I right?
That was the World Health Organization statistics.
Right. I think they incorporate more than just innovation, which was primarily what I was citing. I think that there are a lot of problems with the American healthcare system. It's not, granted, there is no perfect free market system. Again, this is a spectrum, and I think the fault there is not necessarily less intervention, but more, especially in terms of the insurance company structure of it all. I think that tends to be the main issue.
Yeah, I know with the United States, most of the healthcare issues we have do stem from the way we kind of have our insurance function, but that's its own separate issue. It has nothing to do with this particular conversation. So I guess you can ask your last question, then I'll get to my last one, and then we'll get our token in, as Kyle mentioned.
All right,
don't be racist.
So I came into this discussion. Okay, so I actually did come into the discussion not to provide any rights-based arguments, because most people on my side of the argument tend to do that. What I wanted to do was actually try to provide a more utilitarian approach to this in our discussion. I was just wondering, how did that come across? Did it come across as less convincing than what you're used to, or is this kind of a tactic you'd like to see more pro-lifers attempt to do?
I would say that I didn't personally find it, like I said with my last answer, I didn't find it as convincing as a rights conversation may have been, though I would suggest that if you would like to continue using it, that might be more convincing once refined. It might just be that it's in its early stages of being refined for that particular type of argument for you. If that's the case, I wouldn't mind seeing a more refined version of it later on down the line, and maybe having this conversation again on my channel in a year or so. That would be something I'm fine with if you'd like to refine the approach.
I think I would actually like to do more of that. I actually found this approach in a blog article by Brian Kaplan himself. He only did this as a sketch. He himself is a pro-choice advocate, being a much more libertarian than myself. But I actually thought of taking his argument and running with it. A lot of my sources you could actually find through him, at least what I cited. So I just want to throw that out there in case I'm accused of any plagiarism here.
And let me take a second to say hey to Katie real quick.
Hi, Katie. She's up there.
Hi.
Katie.
Can you hear me?
Hi.
Tokenism.
Welcome back.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Yay.
The token woman. Okay, sir.
We
So
don't want to assume her gender for the purpose of the discussion. Are you female?
Oh, shush.
Well, Steve has already granted that he is one. So I mean, here
I
we
have
are.
a child.
Don't take away my gender identity, Suris. Please.
I mean, I'm personally an Apache helicopter, so I mean, here we are.
Oh no. We're not starting that. Okay. Sirs, go ahead and you're getting ready to make a point. Go ahead and finish that up, and then we'll get to Katie and her questions or her comments.
So any other questions that I would have that are on my written out section would entail a longer conversation. So I'll just say this. I might just mirror Max's question. What did you think of my approach, since I've answered how I thought of your approach?
Honestly, you caught me off guard a lot with the legal stuff. Although I did enjoy going over Roe v. Wade, I did enjoy going over the legal history. Thank you for kicking me on my toes about that, because I was actually preparing for more of a moral discussion. But while it did catch me off guard, it is encouraging me to actually look at it from that perspective, because all the moral arguments in the world, if you don't have a good approach to the law, it's not going to get you too far.
Fair enough.
Wow.
And also, yeah.
That's actually, I happen to agree with him on that, like wholeheartedly. By the way, we actually agree on this. Believe it or not, Max.
Yeah.
I think you have a really good summation on that.
Okay, it's always nice when the debates go really good, but man, it makes
What's going on here? What happened to this show?
Somebody throw a chair at somebody. Okay, Katie.
You made the mistake of giving us. You made the mistake of giving us both a lot of time to prepare, so we came with our prepared arguments instead of.
Pushing it back and
hey, listen. That's no indicator. Trust me. That's no indicator.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Katie, as a woman watching this discussion, what were your comments or your takeaways?
Oh boy. Let's just say here, okay, there's a couple points that you guys made, and actually I'm kind of critical of both of you. Not I am a good liberal, like pro-choice kind of girl. But I think unless you're a woman and you've lived through the experience and you know people like in your life that have gone through it, it's a much different, you could talk all day long about the philosophical debates about the morality, and you can talk all day about all of the different aspects about society and what does happiness mean. But, I think you have to keep in mind the legal aspect, and it's probably the most critical aspect of the whole debate. First off, my number one point was you were talking about the Plan B. And I just wanted to clarify something. Plan B basically it doesn't stop the sperm and the egg from connecting. It stops it from implanting.
Okay.
So
it stops it from attaching to the uterine wall, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And
I was like in the ballpark, but nowhere near the correct base.
Right. And I have used Plan B before. I'm a rape survivor, and I was given Plan B after my rape. And you had mentioned too about how effective Plan B is. You can use it up to 72 hours after the unprotected sex. However, it loses effectiveness after 24 hours. So
yeah, I believe it goes down to like a 40% on the third day, doesn't it?
Correct.
Yes.
So while you can take it up to 3 days away, the most effective you're going to get is if you can get it within the 24 hours. And then the actual like birth or the abortion pill itself, that is only used in like the early like components of abortion. So like the very early weeks of of a pregnancy. And that it's basically just creates like a miscarriage.
And to say this also brings up a small like mini conversation about that's kind of around in vitro fertilization as well, because I think it's on the third day during in vitro fertilization they actually they can pull one of the 8, like you're basically 8 cells at that point. They can pull one of the 8 cells to determine if there's going to be any problems with that fertilization. And at that point it creates a whole nother conversation of, do we consider a clump of 8 cells a person at that point?
Well, they're embryos, so theoretically, these are cells that could produce a human. But either way, these are the abortion pill and the Plan B are like basically, they're separate entities completely. And
can I ask you a question, Katie? I just want to get so that everybody can get on the same page here. Can you kind of take a second and explain your your views on abortion and where you stand? Because I know that you're a mom, and sometimes even though you said you were liberal, that doesn't necessarily equate to somebody that's supportive of the right to choose abortion. So can you just kind of personally tell us like where you fall on that spectrum of on the issue?
Sure. Yeah, I'm pro-choice. I have never had an abortion myself, but I have used Plan B. I have a son who has disabilities, and I just believe that every woman has a right to make their own choice for their own body. And it's not my place to make a decision for anybody.
Cool.
I can agree with that.
Thank you for sharing your views.
I also wanted to bring up one thing about the adoption stuff that you guys were talking about. I think there's there's a complete misnomer or this misconception that if somebody is going to abort, they're automatically going to consider adoption, and that's not the case. When they go back and talk to women who had considered adoption or abortion, if they don't go through with the abortion, most of them aren't giving the baby up for adoption. They're keeping the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking at this as a long-term, like this will help solve the adoption issue in the United States. No, the United States has an adoption problem.
They're two separate issues there.
They're completely two separate issues, correct? And
that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to steer back when we were at that portion of the conversation.
Yeah. The whole adoption world in general is so corrupt, and international adoption international adoption is literally human trafficking. If you learn anything about where these children come from and how they're stolen from families. So, I mean, that's a whole beast. Americans just have this entitlement issue where they think they should have other people's babies. That's secondary, though. I don't begrudge anyone that decides to adopt. But when you guys were talking about the legal components of it, and you were kind of going through like how it's changed state by state, in some states in the United States, since they rolled back, I think it was under George W. Bush, where he allowed states to change laws, or they have more autonomy in how they legislated abortion. More and more of these southern states are making it harder and harder and harder for women to get abortions. And so in some states, there's literally only one clinic in the entire state.
Not even just in southern states. I actually have a friend who had to get one, and like I have friends and family who have gone through this. And it's one of the reasons
really bad too.
Maine is apparently not that great for it either, because I have a friend who went through the whole process in Maine and was explaining that like she still remembers all the stuff she had to go through in order to get hers in Maine, and it's something that's still on her mind now.
It's horrific.
So
Sorry.
Oh, go on. I'm sorry. I was just gonna end in saying that this is one of the reasons why I'm pro-choice, is because I have several horses in this race, basically.
Yeah,
even though I'm male, I have several horses in this race based on my loved ones.
Right.
So this is not a kind of banning, but not legal, but it's a de facto ban. It's not something that is legislated, but
well, Mississippi tried to completely ban abortions, but that failed, I think, in 2005. 5 states in the country have it's like a trigger that if the federal government pulls back Roe v. Wade and like says it's a state issue, they will automatically make abortions illegal. Then there's states like where I live in Minnesota, where we're one of the more progressive states for abortion, and yet OBGYNs and providers are unable to give abortions in clinics, and women that need abortions, like say for instance, I have a friend who had a child that had a tracheotomy 13, which most of these babies literally die before gestation. They would never, if they live beyond, I think, a year, you're really lucky. And so she was given the option to terminate the pregnancy, and she did, but she had to go to Planned Parenthood and walk past protesters in order to terminate a pregnancy for a fetus that wasn't going to live. That's horrible.
One of the worst things, because I actually have I have a video on my channel where, if you're familiar with Pastor Greg Locke, he was giving his views on abortion, and I had to like pull all the statistics on what Planned Parenthood actually does over and above just abortion. And it was very frustrating, because every single time I would pull more and more stats for my point, I actually got angrier and angrier, because I'm just like, look at all the contraceptives that they provide. They actually provide pap smears in these particular states. They provide this. And I'm just like, why are people protesting these places again? They do a whole lot more than just that.
Yeah, Planned Parenthood's like, in terms of how much money they make from abortions, is peanuts compared to how they generate and help women in terms of, especially those who are low income. They have a sliding scale for payments where women who have zero access to healthcare can get birth control pills and have mammograms and can have pelvic exams. I mean, they're really there to help women have better quality of life, and especially those who are poor. And that's another issue.
They can also test you for. They can also help test you whenever you think you might have STDs.
Correct.
This is it's a big thing in the polyamorous community when they have to get tested for multiple partners. That's one of the things that they cite is, hey, if you absolutely need to, go to a Planned Parenthood. You can figure out if you may or may not have an issue, and you can communicate that better afterwards.
Yeah, and I've used polyamory. They have like multiple partners.
New one every week.
Big love.
How is that new to you?
Yeah, how's that new? Richard Carrier is a big fan.
Was here.
Yeah, I mean, he promotes polyandry and he promotes hedonism. I mean, he's a hedonistic polyamory kind of guy. That's a shtick.
What does the Mormons do? Polygamy.
Polygamy.
No, that's when you get married.
Yeah, but that's one man and like a zillion women. Polyamory.
Yeah,
like
the poly community.
That's the way God intended. That's the way it should be. Yes. One man.
I've heard of polyamory before. I'm just making the point. I do know what polyamory. I'm just making the point that there are so many different groups that come out each and every week. You know, I heard Pan the other day. That's a new one. Pan I'd never heard of before.
Pansexual.
Pansexual. Yeah. Same as omnisexual.
No, they don't discriminate.
It's like fluid sexuality.
They love skillets.
It's kind of to max a little bit. Because I heard there was a woman that was giving her story probably a year ago when I saw this, but she was telling the story about how she was in a life or death situation with the baby that she was trying to bring in, and it was either going to be that the child was going to be delivered and the mother lose her life, or vice versa. And so they went up going to I believe it was actually a Catholic ran hospital, and they have a policy of always choosing the life of the child over the mother. Like they would not terminate that because of it was a risk to the mother. Like they were always going to choose the child's life over the. What do you say to something like that?
Oh yeah, that actually goes back to St. Thomas Aquinas. That's called the doctrine of double effect. In essence, it says you can't do something evil in order to get something good out of it. However, it is permissible to allow something which is evil in order that a greater good can come about it. Are you familiar with those typical trolley problem examples that everyone gets in their undergrad ethics course, where they have this one thought experiment where your trolley is coming to kill 5 people, and you could switch the track and only one person would die as a result. And most people do that because, it's 5 to 1. But yet they give the second example where, okay, there's the same trolley going down the track. Yeah, you push him and it'll stop the trolley. And it seems like the first one is permissible and the second one wasn't. Well, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, the reason was there seems to be a moral difference for all of us between allowing an evil to take place, tolerating it so a good can come out of it, and straight up doing an evil so something you could prevent another evil. Like there's a distinction for me between bombing enemy combatants, because a just war can be justified, and dropping an atomic bomb directly where millions of people will die, not as a consequence, but as targeting civilians. I think that the second one is reprehensible for that reason, but I think given the nature of war, the first one is acceptable. I think the same kind of principle goes about this. Catholic hospitals, what they'll do is they'll take the unborn out, they'll let it die outside of the table just to allow the mother to live. They're not killing it directly.
By the way, there actually is a professor that argues, even in the trolley problem, the initial one, that it's always wrong to pull the switch. There actually is a paper out there where she argues that.
Oh yeah, I don't doubt it.
Am I the only one that has a hard time?
Go ahead, Katie.
Am I the only one that has a hard time, like, given the elephant in the room with how the Catholic Church has handled the abuse of so many victims and children, and how they've treated, like, priests have abused and sexually assaulted children? Am I the only one that struggles to even, like, I can't?
No, you're
nothing.
No, you're
nothing
not.
The Catholic.
However,
No,
nothing the Catholic Church
you're not.
says.
Go ahead.
The whole doctrine of this is they're hypocrites.
You're right. I think some of us in here would agree with that. However, because of some Twitter wars that have gone on between some of the people in the room, we
love Twitter.
The Twitter wars were getting real, and as people who follow Steve knows, even after today, that's all he's been doing for like a week. Is I don't even think he sleeps. I just think he lives to blow Twitter to pieces. So
I'm going to say Steve is basically a Twitter Jedi.
I'm just blowing all the time. That's all I do. Blow, blow, blow. I get up, I blow. I go, I get ready for bed, I blow. I just blow.
Steve was tagging me in some Twitter
I
wars
was.
today.
He goes to town.
I'll just leave it here. I'll just leave it here. I've already gotten an earful about this from Steve before, and in order to make a truce about this, we've decided not to bring it up. So I am not touching
that was one of the
issue.
reasons I would actually come to bat for Max on this one as well. Not saying you were trying to do anything to Max at all, but what the Catholic Church does and what Max does, I see as separate issues. I can have the conversation with Max without having the conversation with him as a representative of the church.
Yeah, but
there is something
I recognize.
But putting aside the church thing, though, there is something still to be said, and I'm glad that Max had brought up the difference between, and both you guys did, between the legal and moral concerns. There's completely different arguments, but I mean, as Kyle brought up, they'll let a baby like die on a counter, and I don't whether that's having to do with the faith or the religion. What medical reason? What medical reason is for that?
That wasn't what I was saying. That in many cases, they choose the life of the child over the life of the mother.
Same thing. But what's the medical reasoning for that? I mean, you can argue a moral reason, which I would disagree with. I would choose the mother, or at least allow the mother to make that kind of decision for herself going in. Right. I think that's
right. There's not a medical reason.
I don't know reason either. But hang on, doctors are not there to make moral decisions on that type of issue. They're there to make medical decisions. If they think that the mother's life is salvageable and it's viable, that they can save the fetus, I'm all for that. But I don't think that they have a right to make those kind of decisions based upon any kind of medical issues, because there is none to be had. Would you agree?
I do think ethical issues are related to medical issues. There's a whole discipline called bioethics that's kind of centered around this.
There's a distinction, though. I understand the distinction between bioethicacy and medicine, but there's no medical reason for those doctors to make those decisions. So if there's no medical reason, if the woman has decided her life is more valuable than her child, should we make those decisions? For the same reason, we don't have any statute that says a parent has to give like a kidney to a child if they need it, right? There's nothing in the law that says that, right? You have to provide for the necessary things, but I, as a father, if my daughter needed a kidney, I am not legally obligated to give her one. Morally, it's a different question, obviously. Yeah, obviously, morally, it's a different question.
Yeah, we can view you as a moral monster without having to bring legality into the conversation.
Well, that's what I'm saying. What would it be for the situation where they have to make a decision between the baby and the mother? Why is it wrong for the mother to make that kind of decision and say, I want it to be my life if it comes down to that? Are you okay with that?
No. Like in what context? Are you speaking about in life or death situations?
Yeah, let's say they can only save one. The mother goes in, and she's already signed a thing saying, if there's complications and it comes down to my life or the child, save my life. Are you okay with them doing that?
Well, like if the mother comes in and says, yeah, I want my life saved over the child, of course. Yeah, like that's what I said was behind the doctrine of double effect. Although conversely, if I might ask you, if the mother said, "I want to die just so this unborn,"
oh, absolutely,
just so yeah, you'd be.
I would be okay with that. Sure. That's a mother's choice.
No,
why not? That's her choice.
I'm actually kind of intrigued.
I would if Suris said to me, "Hey, Steve, I'm going to kill you or my daughter," I'm going to pick him killing me, right? So I don't think that's any real moral question there.
I see that Katie had disagreement though, so I actually would like to hear it.
I think doctors. Well, I think it depends on when, like, at what stage the fetus is at, right? Like,
this is coming out. Like, if there's a complication when she's giving birth, like it's gonna something's gonna happen where
it's crowning, it's ready to go.
Right? Yeah.
10 centimeters, whole 9 yards.
Well, theoretically, would the woman? I mean, at that point, these types of situations are so rare.
It was a total hypothetical because there's some Catholic churches have not churches but hospitals. I was watching a thing on the other day where she was pointing out that some Catholic hospitals have a policy where if it comes down to it, if there is a complication or a risk, they default to the child over the mother. Like it's not a.
Well, I think in
default to the kid.
Well, okay, so in childbirth, obviously it's extremely dangerous, especially towards the end when the baby's coming out. And if there is a situation where, say, like the mother is going to lose a ton of blood and hemorrhage, I mean, that really happens. And so in that case, sometimes it is, there's not much they can do for the mother, and saving the child is the appropriate, choice. But, modern medicine, and this is why we should have babies in hospitals and not at home, can do a pretty good job of ensuring that these women survive and the babies.
Totally.
Are you against midwifery? Just like home birthing. I've heard bad things about it, but I've never looked into it myself.
That's complicated.
No worries.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. In general, I think that the safest place for a child to be born, specifically given the risks of childbirth, is in a hospital. There's people that will argue that the hospitals aren't safe and they're not comfortable, but hospitals are doing a much better job today in making.
That's right. If they argue they have to actually fight it with stats, and they can't.
Yeah, they can't.
I think the way to argue it would be that you have to, as a parent, you want to give your child every possible advantage, and having a delivery in a hospital is a fundamental way to initially give your baby the most fighting chance of survival over something.
Absolutely, because
that's the way I would argue that.
Well, here's my example: is I was pregnant and I had a child that was born ill, and up until he was born, we had no idea he was ill. He couldn't even breathe on his own. He had to have oxygen when he was born, and like, coming out of a pregnancy like that and coming out of a labor, which was 59 hours, he could, if I would have had him at home, he would have died, and so, these kinds of situations happen. And that's why, I had zero indication that there was anything wrong with him my entire pregnancy.
That's a good point. Okay, so Steve, do you wanna see if we got any super chats or questions for anybody on the panel?
We got 2 super chats. Sandring, $20. Thank you, Sandring. Since I can't debate, I'll put my 2 tens this way. Thank you, Sandring. Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, $5. What you believe has no effect on what constitutes as life. Sorry, but life does not begin at conception. You know what? I have to disagree. I'm fine with life beginning with conception. I just think that the terminology they use varies from medical to colloquial. But when you have a sperm and egg together, you have life. I have no problem exceeding that point. How about you guys?
I gotta say, and actually, I think most of the conversation we actually had on the grounds that we granted that.
Yeah, I actually didn't argue that. Yeah, I didn't even argue that the unborn was human.
I didn't think so either.
Yeah. I granted him that in the very beginning, and we argued from that point onward.
Yeah, I didn't hear anybody argue against that either, because I think we all agree
because
that
I figured that's the strongest position I think can be made. And whether or not you agree, I grant it because it's the strongest position he could have.
Sure.
And I'd rather argue
humanity.
against his strongest position.
Life
Right,
within the uterus. Life within the uterus is quite different than life outside of the uterus. So
yeah, that
you have to consider like I think the earliest gestation that a fetus could theoretically live on its own is like 22 weeks. And so
I absolutely agree.
You know, anything
I mean,
before 22 weeks,
it's not
it's not going to live. Not viable.
Well, the statement is life does not begin at conception. I think that's fundamentally wrong. Life does believe in conception.
It does.
But
yes, it does.
Yeah, it begins at conception. I don't know how anybody can argue otherwise. But as you said, it's not viable on its own. To me, a zygote or a blastocyte, to me, is not a human being. It's a potential human being. Okay, absolutely a potential human being, but it's not a human being. It's life, though.
Right.
Do you mean
and like most states that have abortion, most women are getting them in the first trimester, and
I'm fine for that. I'm against third trimester.
A first trimester is like 12 weeks, right? When your baby is 12 weeks, it's like the size of a grape.
Yeah, I know. I am not a fan of partial birth abortion or trimester. Now I understand when the health of the mother is concerned and stuff like that. I get that, but I have not really seen a good argument for medical necessity, a non-medical necessity to have a late-term abortion. First, and maybe even partially in the second, fine. I have no problem with that. I don't see why anybody should care about first-term abortion. But the late term, I think there's a really strong argument to be had for that. So I think when it comes to the abortion debate, if the people that are against abortion want to try to instill that into society, they need to start with some kind of compromise, because it's not going to be all or nothing. Neither side is going to get what they want. I think if both sides agree, late-term abortion probably not a good thing, and start there. And you said a death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing. Maybe work it that way, but that's just my personal point of view on it, because people
they're already doing that though within the legislation that they're enacting in states. I mean, they're dismantling and taking away rights from women. I mean, there's states where you have to get a mandatory ultrasound, you have to listen to the baby's heartbeat, you have to go through counseling, you got to wait 48 hours.
Anything.
I don't agree. That's an argument for
get that money ready, Suris. Get that money ready.
Anything above. Anything, and we both might be paying, because me and Kyle have a bet against Jimmy on this, actually, strangely enough. But I think anything, like, I'm fine with the 24-hour wait idea, like, hey, don't rush into this decision. I'm okay with that. But as soon as you start getting into listen to the heartbeat, do this, now you're asking this person to go.
That's mental torture.
It's coercion. You're coercing the woman to not.
And I'm not okay with coercion.
And that's what they're doing, is they're coercing the woman.
Sure.
And
that's what my friend went through in Maine.
And I don't
specifically what she went through.
Right. And listen, I'm not against, like, I think a lot of women that go into these clinics have already made up their mind. Right. And they're not just going into a clinic to find out they're pregnant and then another 24 hours is suddenly going to change their mind. Most women that are going there have made their decision, and making them wait another 24 hours to change, to get through what they want to get done, it's actually kind of torturous.
Yeah.
I can see both sides of that argument. I'm torn. I can see both sides of this argument, actually, though.
I can too, but I'm going to side with Katie's side on it. But let me ask Katie, do you think that there is something to be said for having some kind of counseling, because no matter what they decide, it's traumatic one way or another? Would you agree that?
Yes, absolutely. But I don't think but the counseling that they're requiring has nothing to do with post-operative abortion counseling.
Yeah,
the counseling that they're doing
is
they're trying to manipulate the woman to keep the baby. I 100% agree with post-operative abortion counseling, because every single woman I know that has gone through an abortion has grieved. These women that are having abortions, they're not like high-fiving and like running off and skipping, but they also are not, depressed for their whole lives. They need the proper aftercare to deal with the choice that they made.
Totally agreed.
I can agree with that.
that's a good place to we should end on agreeing all together. I think that's a good.
This was the worst dumpster fire
wrapping
debate on abortion I've ever heard in my life. I quit.
I know that
Steve, you were expecting
Max
anger.
is like
The unborn. I was just gonna say last thing. You guys are all murderers, and children. The unborn are humans. Bye. Sorry.
I was gonna say Max is literally the nicest pro-lifer I think I've ever met, because most pro-lifers are
Freedom!
There is
Maybe.
one
Yeah,
more
so
nicer than him.
Thank you for that. I
There is
appreciate
one
the
person
compliment.
nicer than him, though. And when we had Brittany Simon and her name escapes me now. What's her name? No, it was the gothic looking chick that had the piercings.
Oh yeah.
But she was the one that was pro life. I mean, it was scope off of what you think. You had the goth punk rocker chick that was arguing for pro life, and then sweet Brittany Simon that was doing the abortion side. But the back and forth was just uber respectful. I mean, there wasn't points of contention. It was weird. It was weird. It was good, but it was weird.
That's how it should be, right? You shouldn't be telling. It's weird when I'm like a pro-lifer is like, you're a murderer, like, and like what Suris was saying was like, just because you're pro-choice does not mean you're pro-abortion. And I think that's the biggest misconception.
Yeah.
Very good point. So, Katie, what do we have coming up?
What do we have
Max.
coming up?
You got one? Yeah, we're gonna get what you have coming up on Pathos, but Max, I think, had something to add in on there.
Oh, I was gonna say I kind of do use pro-abortion and pro-choice interchangeably, but I also use anti-abortion, pro-life interchangeably. For me, I use those synonymously, not necessarily out of malice or to make any kind of generalizations, but that's just how words get messed up in my head. So just putting that out there.
Sure.
Oh, you didn't do it today. Don't worry.
No,
okay.
We framed it correctly. We framed it correctly
So-
early
so-
on. So
The real question.
Okay.
The real question is, Katie, what do you think about jelly juice for like Plan B?
Oh my gosh.
Oh no!
Did I?
What?
So oh my gosh. So
Can we
last
talk about this
night.
for a second?
That's-
What about that
that's-
post that she did last week, where she was asking for, and I don't want to go too deep into it because we actually have another show coming up in a couple weeks that we're going to do about turpentine and more chili juice. But she was asking for amputees to let her adopt them so that she could show how they would be able to regrow their limbs from drinking this cactus juice.
And she was also looking for families of children that were have Down syndrome so that they could be like a case study for her.
Oh my God.
It's so cringy.
Yeah.
I'm getting
Yeah.
I
triggered.
mean, how is this? How is that legal? I mean,
It's not.
It shouldn't be.
I don't.
yeah, I'm kind of confused
I
about
don't
that
know.
one myself.
Where's
She's really
very legal.
She's trying.
Yeah, where's
she's
she
still trying to.
circumventing it?
So I think there's just more and more pressure coming on her from the Ohio Attorney General, and there's this like insatiable need for her to try to substantiate these claims because the pressure is likely on. We don't see it. I mean, the people that are against her are like, nothing's happening, but I'm certain there's things that are happening behind the scenes that we just don't know about. And I think some of these like ridiculous requests are a direct reaction to the pressure that's being put on her by the state attorney or the Ohio Attorney General, because they have Ohio has a law where it's like truth in marketing or truth in advertising that protects consumers from misleading marketers. And so she has to be able to prove the things that she says. And if she can't sell it.
Oh man. Guys, if you have not checked it out, Katie writes for Pathos. It's called Without a Crystal Ball. It's fantastic. But she, I think coming up soon, is having an article about a gentleman in turpentine. And I think we're gonna cover this in a show in coming up in a couple weeks. But will you give us kind of a preview?
Sure.
More, but,
so I have been doing some research on this. Yeah, there's this guy. Well, it's twofold. There's a doctor that was based out of New York who decided that she was going to use turpentine to treat patients because, according to her, in the African American community, and I should preface that this doctor is also African American, she said that her African American clients or patients told her that their ancestors all used to use turpentine to treat ailments. Now, there is a medical history with turpentine as useful in medicine, but it hasn't been used since the 1800s when they realized it was toxic.
Mm-hmm.
So, right.
What I like about this story though is that she's taking medical advice from her patients. Like she comes out and says, "Oh yeah, a patient told me this will be great."
So then she decides to do the dosing, right? And she does the medical trials on herself and decides that based on her own reactions, this is how you can dose and send out turpentine. And so then she started dosing it out to her patients. Well, then the medical board in the state of New York was like, you cannot give turpentine to your patients. That's going to kill them, right? And she was like, they're just against alternative treatments. They just want me to medicate, that whole crap. Long story short, she wasn't a doctor for very long here in the States. She lost her license. They stripped her license in New Jersey and in New York, and she fled to Panama to avoid persecution here in the United States. And now she has this group of people, one guy named Danny Glass, who has a large social media following, who uses her advice to get people to drink turpentine and eat borax.
Are these people just insane? I mean, seriously, are they just literally mentally compromised in some degree? I have no other way to explain it.
I don't know.
Christiana, you have teenagers eating Tide Pods, so who the fuck knows, right?
Well, no, I think they've done some. I just read a study that was done, I think it was last year, that kind of profiled people that believe in this crap. And they're mostly conspiracy theorists. They're also anti-vaccine. They believe that the government is hiding things from us and they know something that we don't. And and so they use that position of we know what you don't as a way to feel empowered.
Oh yeah, we've all said the same thing on here.
In that entire story is when the New York board of the medical board had a conversation where they said you should not give your patients turpentine because if that were me, the conversation would be you do not have a medical license anymore. Adios. There wouldn't be please don't.
They put her on. They suspended her, and then she had to have other doctors that were monitoring her while she practiced medicine, and she wouldn't turn over her records to the medical board while she was working with those doctors. And so they said, well, why won't you turn over these records? And she was just like, why do you want to know what I'm doing? And she was on the verge of being sued by the federal government. And so she just went, peace out.
I can't believe they were going to suspend her when she was giving her patients turpentine. That is the clear indicator that this woman does not need to have anything to do with actual people.
Right.
No one.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Oh. I'm triggered
unfortunately, when you're dealing with
well, see, the thing with the turpentine is though, I think as I've read more and more about this, is that when you do take turpentine, I think it does have alcohol in it or something where it does give it releases something within the body that gives you a high. And so people that drink it, they ultimately end up feeling good following it, even though it probably tastes like garbage. And I think maybe that euphoria, I don't know, it's weird.
So does air duster cans, but you wouldn't write that out in a prescription for a migraine. You got a migraine? Take 3 air duster canisters when you get home.
Let's go sniff some. Let's go sniff some varnish.
I mean, they say it's going to treat autism, and they also, the same guy that says you should do turpentine, he also sells MMS.
And
Jim Humble.
I find that very funny because on the one hand, it's vaccine has mercury in it and that's poisonous, but at the same time, let's all sniff turpentine. So
yeah, that's.
I I don't expect people that are that far gone conspiratorial wise to be consistent. Okay, it's not
No,
a big
well,
surprise.
this guy that's like so anti-vaccine and drinks turpentine, he has like tattoos all over his body too. So
how does it not kill him? I don't get it. That's like drinking.
This is the best argument against. This is the best argument against natural selection. If that was true, he would have died a long time ago.
Right.
Actually,
well,
it's the best argument against. It's the best argument against pro-life because, as we can see, obviously sometimes.
You know what? I've changed my position. Should have been aborted.
Yeah, some people just don't need to be here.
Like Danny Glass's dad should have just pulled out, right?
Yeah, that's where we're going to end this tonight. That's the best. That's the line of the night. Thank you to the Catholic Fusionist, Suris the Skeptic, and Katie Paulson. Thank you all three for joining us. This was fun. Now for your dumpster fire, join us tomorrow at 8 for Ideology, where we will be joined by Shannon Q and Logic, and we will be talking to somebody that identifies as an incel. If you don't know what that is, please spend the next 24 hours diving into that world, and you will be busy for the remainder of the time until the next show. But we're going to sit down with an incel, have a discussion, and see where it goes. So, until then.
Non-sequitur, your facts are uncoordinated.